to the new spring reread on reading the pattern. This will be part 2 and we'll cover chapters 6 through 12, so be sure you didn't miss part 1 and stay tuned for parts 3 and 4 as well. And make sure you've also checked out my Eye of the World reread series as well. And now let's get right to it. This video may include spoilers for all Wheel of Time books. If you have not finished reading the series and do not want to be massively spoiled, stop here or proceed at your own risk. Chapter 6, Surprises. Moiraine and Siuan each make ready to head out to take names the next day, and a fellow accepted Shirian tells them that she's heard from multiple sources that the Aiel are retreating. Moiraine and Siuan are grinning, thinking this means they'll get to go to camps closer to Dragonmount. But Mirian comes to tell Moiraine that she will not be allowed to go due to the shock she must be in over her uncle's deaths. Instead, she will make clear copies of the notes taken the day before, and when Siuan agrees with Mirian, she gets roped in to keep Moiraine company as well. Siuan, though disappointed, has figured out that this way they might get to see all the names and have a better chance of figuring out which one is the Dragon Reborn. Moiraine tells Siuan about her uncle's deaths, and Siuan has just the right words of comfort. They go about their task, dismayed that so many entries are lacking in detail. Elida checks on them but says nothing. The next day, they return to the task without being told to, but soon 2 clerks appear, prepared to do the work themselves. They leave and return with Tamra herself, who gives Moiraine and Siuan permission to continue the task as long as they wish. This day, they find entries that actually could be the Dragon Reborn, and they begin copying these over into their own notebooks as well. A sitter for the Grey Aaja, named Jarna, visits to ask Moiraine who in House Damodred might now ascend to the Sun Throne. 6 more sitters, one from each Aaja, do the same, with Sutama of the Red openly asking Moiraine if she has thought about ever being Queen of Cairhien herself. That night, Moiraine's nightmares include visions of herself on the Sun Throne. Chapter 7, The Itch. The third day, they find even more names that could be the Dragon Reborn, and are surprised again by a visit from Tamra. This time, Tamra asks Moiraine to take a sealed note to a green sister named Karine Nagashi. Moiraine is intensely curious about everything she sees in the Green's quarters, but she only hands the note to Karine, watches her read it without expression, and listens as Karine tells 2 of her warders that Tamra wants her urgently, but does not say why. After she leaves, Moiraine catches up with Siuan, who tells her that Tamra also sent a note to a Grey sister named Aisha. Moiraine does some quick thinking, noting that both of these sisters are known for their strict adherence to the law and have worn the shawl for a long time. Moiraine deduces that Tamra wants them for searchers for the infant Dragon Reborn. Moiraine also tells Siuan that she thinks if they do find the baby, they will not bring him to the tower and expose him to the Reds, but instead educate him in secret. The next day, Tamra also sends messages to Mylan, a white, Valera, a brown, and Ludus, a yellow. All 3 have the same notable qualities as Karine and Aisha. Day by day, Moiraine and Siuan continue to put names in their notebooks and to attempt to gain any more information they can about who Tamra might be choosing for her searchers. The new keeper, Eldra, notices Moiraine hanging around outside Tamra's study, and that puts an end to their spying. Chapter 8, Shreds of Serenity. The Accepted continue to take lessons in the evening from Aes Sedai. A lot of Aes Sedai are irritated about having to teach novice classes normally taught by Accepted, so some of them refuse to teach the Accepted. Moiraine refuses to stop copying names from the list, and so a lot of Aes Sedai refuse to teach her and Siuan. 3 of Tamra's searchers, though, Mylan, Aisha, and Karine, do teach her, but it makes Moiraine anxious that they are remaining in the tower instead of beginning their search. The Accepted also continue to practice for their test for the shawl, One evening when Moraine is practicing, Elida visits her, and not satisfied with Swan and Mirel's efforts to distract her, she takes it into her own hands.
Elida easily breaks Moraine's concentration with an incessant stream of flashes, bangs, and physical blows, all the while berating her to weave faster. When Moraine is in too much pain to go on, Elida does the same to Swan before leaving them.
Mirel gets Shiriam and Elid, and the three try to help them with an ointment. In the morning, Elida returns to provide them healing, but she returns for the same treatment on 2 more nights. After the third, it is Mirian who heals them and tells them that Elida won't bother them again. Elida clearly views them with animosity, and Moraine is terrified that she showed them a glimpse of what to expect in the real testing. 10 days past Guitarra's foretelling, the spring thaw begins, and the number of potential names begins to dwindle. Another 9 days, and Moraine is summoned to her testing.
Chapter 9. It begins.
Moraine is terrified that she isn't ready and will fail, but the thought that she could still continue her search for the boy child calms her. Mirian leads her to the testing chamber, where there is a large oval ring terangrial and a sister from each Aaja, including Elida for the reds and Anaya of the blues. Moraine disrobes to complete the test clad in the light and thinks of the little notebook in her belt pouch.
She is instructed to complete each weave on a sign of a 6-pointed star that will lead her where to go. Moraine focuses on keeping complete outward composure as required.
Determined, she enters the terangrial and finds herself in a strange stone corridor, naked and without knowing what she is doing. For each weave, she finds herself in a new, usually unfamiliar place and without remembering what has just happened. She's frequently naked and confronted with obstacles that include men ogling her, thorny bushes, death's head spiders, and Trollocs. She must frequently divide her weaves to both complete the testing weave and to deal with these threats. After several of these, she finds herself heading into the Blight.
Chapter 10. It finishes.
For the final weave, she is confronted by her father, who tells her she must come with him to see her dying mother, and she is forced to leave him behind. She completes the 100th weave, staggers back into the testing chamber, and remembers everything.
Mirian immediately tells her she has succeeded, and per custom, no one will speak of what happened during the testing. Mirian and Elida leave, and the other sisters go to her, with Anaya immediately offering healing.
Moraine questions whether she has really passed, and Anaya tells her if blushes counted as breaking composure, no one would ever pass. After Anaya heals her, Moraine feels her weariness and comments on the cruelty of the last test. Anaya and the yellow sister Yuan seem to agree, and Moraine deduces that Elida tried to make her fail. Moraine immediately goes looking for Swan and learns that she was taken to her testing. Moraine frets over whether Swan will pass while she waits and notices that the other accepted already treat her differently. Swan returns after passing and convinces Moraine to put mice in Elida's bed for one more prank before they are raised to the shawl the next morning.
Chapter 11. Just before dawn.
Moraine dresses after a sleepless night and is awaited by 7 sisters, one of each Aaja, including, of course, Elida of the Reds. They next knock on Swan's door, and they both are escorted to Tamra, Eldra, and all the sitters in the testing chamber. Moraine and Swan complete their raising ceremony as much as they can simultaneously, though Moraine is first to swear on the oath rod. She feels the sense of compression on her flesh from the oaths that will not fade completely for a year.
After both have sworn, they walk together to the Blue Sisters to indicate their choice of Aaja, and the other sisters, including Tamra, depart. Liana places the shawl on Moraine and Raphella on Swan, and they are also tasked with escorting the newly raised sisters to the Blue Quarters.
But not before some odd little Aaja customs are revealed, including that the 6th sister to give a welcome kiss, in this case Eldra, is to receive a hand-cooked pie from the new Aes Sedai. Rafaela tries to get them to adhere to an all but forgotten custom of proceeding to their quarters clad only in their shawls. They walk through empty corridors, but are greeted by every blue sister in her shawl when they reach their Aaja quarters.
Chapter 12. Entering Home.
Both Moraine and Swan immediately feel welcomed home by the Blues. Moraine notices a sister she isn't familiar with, Cabriana, is oddly meek towards them. They learn that the secret head of the Blue Aaja, the first selector, Edith, is also one of the sitters, and this is very unusual. Edith immediately sits them down to explain that despite what they have been taught about the rudeness of mentioning another woman's strength in the One Power, they must now begin using this to determine rank. The higher the difference in strength from one sister to another, the greater the deference required by the weaker sister.
Edith is ridiculously uncomfortable even discussing this and refuses to answer any questions, clarifying only that the rule does not apply if an Aaja or the tower has set someone specifically above others, as in the leader of an embassy.
Before they can even get back to their rooms, they are approached by Satalia, who wants to test Swan on her ability with puzzles. Because Swan answers impressively, Satalia wants to test her further, and because Satalia is stronger in the power, Swan must obey. As Moraine begins to eat, Anaya offers her healing for the tightness of the oaths, and then tells her that a novice was sent to send her to Tamra. We switch to Swan, who tries to get out of a job Satalia wants her to do, but is unable to do so. She finds Moraine and learns that Tamra has put her in charge of distributing the bounty. Swan tells Moraine that Satalia wants her looking at old reports, and Moraine figures out that Satalia must be the head of the Aaja's eyes and ears. Moraine breaks down when telling Swan of her fears that the tower means to put her on the Sun Throne, and Swan comforts her. Moraine offers Swan healing for the tightness of her oaths, and Swan kisses her. We switch to Lan, who searches for any sign of the Aiel in Kinslayer's dagger and sees none. He feels a pull to head back to the borderlands and thinks to do so immediately as this war is over, but Bukama talks him into waiting a few months, so they initially head south, avoiding Tar Valon. In the Green Quarters, Moraine notices a green sister named Rena Halfden watching her two warders spar. One of them, named Elias, is described as fair with a short beard. This is, of course, Elias Machera, who we know as a wolf brother and Perrin's guide. Varen gives Moraine an herbal concoction that helps her sleep, though it doesn't stop her nightmares and it tastes terrible. Varen is also present at Moraine's testing and is mentioned a few other times by Moraine. I gathered from this that Varen might have some particular interest in Moraine, and we don't exactly know why. I could be reaching a little bit. Maybe it has to do with my idea that Moraine was perhaps seen as having some potential for the Brown, or it could have to do with Varen's other interests. We see that later on she has kind of a similar particular interest in Egwene. And so it could be a little bit of a pattern of Varen's really paying attention to tower initiates that seem to have a lot of potential to her. I love that Moraine uses her signature, "The wheel weaves as the wheel wills," to reassure herself before her testing. I also liked the parallel to Egwene's testing for Accepted and the way she thinks of the ring terangriel in her pouch, the same way that Moraine thinks of her notebook in hers. So this is going to be an interesting discussion, because if we were just going off of what is on the page in this section, I would actually say there's really nothing that has to make it into the show. But some casting decisions do give us something to speculate on here. We know that Karine Nagashi, the green sister that's selected by Tamra as one of her searchers for the Dragon Reborn, has been cast, and so has at least one of her warders. And these roles will be played by Claire Perkins and Peter Franzen. I was especially surprised by the casting of Peter Franzen in this role because he's a very well-known actor in Finland, and yet if you go off of what's on the page for this character in this book, it's virtually nothing. So Peter Franzen has said that his character will be involved in a battle scene, but mostly drama scenes. This was from an interview that was translated from Finnish, so we should be a little bit careful about drawing exact conclusions from this wording. But it does seem clear that he is involved in a scene that involves fighting and extensive filming. And I'm mentioning all this here because this is the only section of the book where Kareen or her warders are actually seen on screen. Later, it's mentioned that Kareen is killed off screen, and we don't know what happens to her warders. Here, we just see Kareen read a letter that Moiraine brings her and then give Moiraine lessons, and her warders literally do nothing except spar. One suggestion I have seen is that perhaps this character of Kareen and her warder will be actually used in the main timeline rather than in a flashback timeline with these New Spring events. I'm not buying that because to me I think it is essential that Tamra's searchers are all killed in the New Spring era because it leaves Moiraine and Siuan as the only ones who know the truth about the Dragon Reborn, and they're on their own up against the Black Aaja. So if they had needed a green sister for events in the main timeline, they had plenty of others they could choose from. They don't need to choose a character named Kareen Nagashi. So I think this character we will see will be shown as one of Tamra's searchers. I think we will see her die, and we will at least learn that all the other searchers have been killed as well, even if Kareen is really the focus. As for her warder and the battle scene he might be involved in, it is possible that warders could be involved in the Battle of the Shining Walls outside of Tar Valon, which ends the Aiel War. So maybe they will show that, and Kareen's warder will be involved. That's probably the likeliest scenario, given that there are no other battles in New Spring, and a scene where Kareen is attacked and killed would not take the days of filming that Peter Franzen was describing. If Kareen's warder were to survive her death and continue to be involved in the main timeline of the show, there would have to be an explanation for that, and there would also have to be a good reason for it. I have speculated previously that perhaps the show has decided to make Elias one of Kareen's warders. There is no obstacle to streamlining these characters in this way. Elias is seen as a warder in these chapters, so the timeline matches. And Kareen's warders and Elias's Aes Sedai are never characters in their own right, so it just simplifies things to streamline those characters in this way. The connection that Elias has to the wolves would then also provide a potential explanation for how he's able to survive the death of his Aes Sedai, and it would also justify, in my mind, casting such a well-known actor in this more important role that would be used again in future seasons. If my speculation turns out to be right, then it is possible that the battle scene that Peter Franzen mentioned could happen in the main timeline. Perhaps it could be the night shoots for the fight between wolves and white cloaks. However, I'm not totally sure that even that would justify at least 3 days of shooting. Plus, the article made it sound like day shooting, not night shooting. So I'm still leaning towards the Battle of the Shining Walls making it into the show. There are other battles that are going to happen in the main timeline, but I don't see any reason for Elias to be involved in those, and I definitely don't see any reason for Kareen's random warder to be kept alive to be involved in those scenes either. Bottom line here, though, main takeaway I have is that it's pretty clear we're going to see a lot more of Kareen and her warder, whoever he may be, than what the New Spring book has to show us. As for anything else, it could be interesting to see Moraine's testing or her raising to the shawl along with Siuan, though I'm not sure either are important enough on their own. I am confident that we are going to see Lyanna in at least one New Spring flashback because the actress Jennifer Chion Garcia was seen carrying around a copy of the book. Now, the major scenes that she's involved in are the raising of Moiraine and Swan and escorting them to the Blue Aaja quarters. It's also mentioned that they renew their friendship with her after being raised. Honestly, Lyanna could be used in any Tar Valon scene, especially after Moiraine and Swan have been raised. So it's much harder to speculate how that character could be used in these flashback scenes. Plus, of course, the character is going to be around for the present timeline as well. Moiraine abhors the idea of being queen, and you get the sense that she would feel that way even if she didn't already have this plan to search for the dragon reborn. Despite her obvious ability with the game of houses, she doesn't seem to have any interest in politics or maneuvering for the sake of ruling or power. She uses her abilities to figure out secrets, such as what Tamra's messages mean. And there's again this emphasis on how much she absolutely hates not knowing things. Another really interesting thing is how much less confident she seems in her own abilities at this stage. She seems to seriously doubt her own ability to pass for the shawl, and yet we see her handle it like a boss in the actual testing. This could have something to do with Elida's treatment of her, which is really egregious. When it comes to Elida, her intentions for why she treats Moiraine and Swan the way she does are harder to be sure of. She says she intends for them to pass, and because we know she can't lie, and she says this very plainly, this much must be true. So, in her own bizarre way and pushing them so hard, she must think she is helping them pass, even though Moiraine is convinced that she's trying to make them fail. The question is more so why she's so bent on it. They do both have great potential in the power, but she can't think they're going to choose red. One possibility that makes some sense to me based on what we know of Elida. Elida is used to being very high in the pecking order due to her strength and the power. There are very few sisters who stand above her. And we know that Moiraine and Swan have great potential that they haven't reached yet. So when they're raised to the shawl, Elida stands above them, but that won't always be true, that she is going to have competition from them at some point. So essentially, she probably already sees them as competition, and maybe in some way taking a hand or asserting her dominance over them in their rise to become Aes Sedai, she thinks will help maintain some power in this relationship. Then, once she is rebuked for her over-the-top treatment of them by Marianne, I think that would create resentment, being humiliated in that way. And this would likely grow over time. And then we add to that fact, we know she's ambitious and she's petty. And so when Swan eventually beats her to becoming Amyrlin, and we know Elida wants to be Amyrlin, that's only going to add to her resentment. So I think I can see how there would be this evolution from competition to resentment to outright animosity over time among these three women. For the Black Aaja in this section, we have Shiriam, who is a fellow accepted and friendly to Moiraine and Swan, and a character who we will come to know very well. We have Jiain, who is outwardly Green Aaja, but most notably we have Jarna, who is also a Grey Sitter and the head of the Black Aaja at this time. She is involved in torturing and killing Tamra and gaining intelligence that the dragon has been reborn. It is her initiative to try and kill the dragon reborn after this that results in so many men and boys and Aes Sedai being killed in the period that will become known as the Vileness. That does it for part 2 of this New Spring reread. Let me know in the comments any questions you have, other things you'd like to see from this reread series, and I want to know what you think about my speculations for the TV show. Do you think we're going to see the Battle of the Shining Walls? How do you think they're going to incorporate Kareen and her warders? Am I crazy to think that he might actually be Elias? And I hope to have part 3 coming your way very soon that will cover chapters 13 through 19. So make sure you're subscribed, and I'll see you back here next time.